So again, I'm Jennifer Irish from the Info Integrity Labs, and this is session 2 of our Solutions Fair. And this session deals with designing for information integrity. So this morning's first session explored how literacy, narrative, and community engagement can equip people to navigate climate mis and disinformation and strengthen public understanding. In this next conversation, we're turning to the question of design, not just in terms of tools or platforms, but also how we structure our media environments, civic spaces, and storytelling practices from the ground up, whether it's things like platform architecture, narrative framing, or participatory processes. Design choices influence what people see, trust, and act upon. So our speakers today are all working at the intersection of information design and public communication, and these choices help inform the kind of debates we have and whether they're inclusive, empowering, or democratically engaging. So as always, for this particular session, we're going to go in a serial order of speakers and invite questions after each one. So we'll go, rather than have all the presenters present in one go, we'll go presenter by presenter, and we're going to start with Carl Miller, who actually has to leave soon after he presents. So Carl is although he's broadcasting from the UK, is a close partner of the Information Integrity Lab. He is the director for the chair of the Center for Analysis of Social Media. He wears a bunch of different hats, and today he's going to be talking about a particular approach he takes called waves. And so, Carl, we're over to you.
All right. Well, Jennifer, thanks so much. And I don't have to go quite so soon after this. I have just over an hour, but I'm so sorry, everyone. I then have to, on a completely different matter, talk to someone about assassination markets on the dark net, which is not actually what I'm here to talk to you all about. But it's lovely to zoom in. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but it's wonderful to see you all, if only via a screen. So yes, designing information environments. Well, I suppose this story kind of starts, or one of the starts of this story is over the summer, where I was hosting Reid Hoffman, the kind of founder of LinkedIn in London, and kind of one of the challenges that kind of Reid gave to me when we were debating was that progressive politics has to imagine a better world as well. We can't simply be kind of trapped in trying to defend the status quo, which we kind of all recognise in one way or another it can be quite flawed, and a world that can be quite imperfect. And kind of that kind of spurred at the beginning of a kind of project which we've launched at Demos. I'm from a centre-left think tank in the UK called Demos, called Waves. Now, Waves, I believe, is the largest digital democratic undertaking that we've rolled out in the UK so far. And the idea is basically to try and build a new way for local governments to make important and difficult decisions. It's been in co-design now for 6 months. So we began kind of working with local governments around the UK, and especially 2 in particular, Camden and South Staffordshire, to really think about how we actually kind of design a kind of multi-step process that can begin with an open-ended question: where should the houses go? What should care look like? How should we spend a pot of money? And then involve thousands and thousands of people within those particular constituencies to actually end up with a decision. And we began with a kind of best practice kind of offline deliberative structure, which typically begins with a very wide group of people to source lots of ideas all together, and then we'll move to much smaller deliberations over longer periods of time, which take those ideas and really try and flesh them out, really try and kind of add detail to them, try and kind of make them make sense when it comes to financing and policy and money and the law. And then normally those are kind of thrown out back into the kind of into the wider groups for kind of discussion. It's called waves because it kind of undulates in that manner between these kind of broad and narrow forms of deliberation. So we did that. We kind of designed a process, 4 steps going from wide to narrow, wide to narrow. But the kind of crucial point was to design the kind of information spaces that these steps would actually be sat on. And using 2 platforms called Remesh and Sci, what we're trying to do is to design information spaces which are consensus seeking. Now, the kind of diagnosis that I have around why politics has become so badly eroded in an age of social media is really to do with the way in which information is created. It's really to do with this extremely pernicious intersection of information which the platform thinks you want to see, kind of feeding into some of our frailest and most vulnerable psychological processes. It's really there in attention optimizing algorithms that we can see polarization beginning. We can see people having their own worldview confirmed again and again. We can see a kind of hardening of in-group and out-group mentalities. We can see groups increasingly thinking that the people on the other political divide don't just disagree with them in a legitimate manner, but are in fact evil or compromised or suborned in some particular way. So we wanted to get away from that. We wanted to build a kind of deliberative process that didn't actually rely on any kind of attention optimization. And so the kind of central premise, and maybe this is the one message of my talk, which I would urge people to take away, is I think there is an algorithm that can save democracy, which we're simply not using enough of, and it's called bridge-based ranking. Now, bridge-based ranking essentially looks at how people discourse with one another. So in our environment, it looks at how people suggest ideas and how they respond to other people's suggestions. And it basically maps that out into a kind of ideological space so that people who are suggesting similar things and agreeing with each other kind of form particular tribes. Now, that will obviously, in many cases, draw out to the actual idiopolitical tribes that these people actually live within. So if you have Uber regulation, you have pro-Uber on one side and you have anti-Uber on another. But sometimes these tribes can be slightly less intuitive. But anyway, bridge-based ranking basically starts surfacing information which or claims or ideas or proposals which people across these tribes all see some benefit in. So it really tries to make information more visible that a diversity of users all actually begin to support. And what we've seen across in other parts of the world, especially in Taiwan, is that this kind of bridge-based ranking essentially gamifies consensus. You submerge a whole host of kind of angry topics of polarization. And instead, you see all these like new items of super consensus emerge instead. And that has allowed the Taiwanese digital democrats to really break through and to find new ways forward on regulation where it was previously really polarized. So this is an auspicious moment for Waves. We've finished the co-design, we've locked in the new process, and actually on Monday it's going to be hitting the streets of Camden. So there'll be bus stops, there'll be billboards. There's digital advertising, there's real world events, there's an enormous amount of effort that's being done to try and reach digitally excluded people and try and reach people that actually don't have much to do otherwise with the government of Camden. Camden, I forget, I'm talking to people that might not know London very well. Camden is a kind of a London borough, a London borough that does an enormous amount of engagement with its citizens. Anyway, it's rolling out, and the government of Camden has committed to basically enacting in both policy, regulation, and law the outcome of this process. And it's a really, really meaty topic. I mean, it's the title is "Who Cares?" And it's basically this process we hope and we think going to reshape the way in which adult social care is being delivered in Camden. Now, this is, of course, one of the major kind of statutory obligations of any local government. It's the most expensive thing the local governments do in the UK. So there's an enormous amount of kind of weight and in a sense kind of expectation on this process delivering. And we don't know what it's going to look like yet. And it might well not work yet. So we're getting ready to problem solve as we go. But as we kind of step into this new phase, we're really hoping that we'll be able to create a kind of a process which we can replicate and we can scale, and ultimately turn into something which governments around the world can all use, and use more and more of than ever before. Like one of the things we always hear, and sorry, I'm almost done, is governments around the world want to do deliberative processes. They want to allow citizens to participate in decisions, but it's just too expensive and time consuming. And so local governments, especially local governments that have so little money now in the UK, find that they simply can't afford to do this on all the questions that they actually want to do it on. And so the kind of key for Waves and the kind of reason we're using technology is to make this just easier and cheaper and more straightforward and faster to do. That's the idea. But in doing so, hopefully building more resilient information spaces. Like we're hoping that what will also become apparent through this is the power of bridge-based ranking to find consensus, and just the importance of political decision making using spaces that people, which are kind of architected to actually help people remember and find and discover what they have in common, not what they have in difference. So that's Waves. Yeah, I will hopefully be able to speak to you all again once it's actually been deployed, and hopefully I'll then have kind of policies and laws and outcomes and kind of practical uses of formal political power that I can also talk to you about.
Well, thank you very much, Carl. Sounds like a thoroughly modern approach to the Agora in a world where we are working in tribalism and echo chambers. I really appreciate you bringing forward some of the practical lessons that you've learned in developing Waves. So I will open it up right away for questions. Yes, please.
Set up as a parameter to avoid the devolution into competing hate speech that we see like in anything that's commented on the internet.
Did you hear that question, Carl?
I'm sorry, I heard perhaps the last third of it.
No.
Well, we'll just get to you, Mike.
I heard the word hate speech.
We'll try again.
I'm curious to know whether the participant space for discussion is going to have some form of content moderation or some community standards so that the discussion doesn't devolve into the competing hate speech frenzies we see on just about anything that has comments on the internet.
Yeah, it's a great question, and there will be inevitably supervision from a kind of deliberation practitioners. Yes, although we're hoping, and experience implies that where kind of hate speech, or in fact comments in general which are very polarizing, will exist, and they'll always exist, in bridge-based ranking they simply get submerged. Because if a diversity of, I mean, unless the hate speech is actually being kind of supported and commented on and kind of uplifted by a diversity of users, it will simply be made less visible, not more. One of the kind of beauties of bridge-based ranking is it isn't simply about getting playing to your home base. It's not just about the sheer number of kind of likes or retweets you're receiving from your kind of diehard kind of supporters of your existing ideological view. You have to draft comments which people that are different to you also begin to agree with. That is the key to being seen. And that's actually what bridge-based ranking gamifies. And so in a strange way, because people just realize that the proposals they're making, if they're kind of florid or aggressive or hateful in some way, simply don't get seen, it actually just leans behavior away from that and towards people trying to find out kind of ways of making proposals and ways of using language which they think actually will receive some kind of support from other people. Just to give people a sense as well about what the discussion online actually looks like. People begin with a question, and I think there's two questions we'll begin with, Camden. There's still actually some debate happening over the weekend about, in fact, what the initial prompt will look like, but it will likely be something like, we know there are going to be difficult choices that have to be made regarding adult social care in Camden over the next 5 years. We want to hear from everyone around what good care to them looks like, who should do it, how should it be received, what matters most. It's going to be a prompt like that. And then what people are being invited to do essentially is to write free text replies to that. And that, of course, is very broad. I mean, people can reply to that however they want. But then also to basically upvote and downvote responses that other people make. And it's that combination together of what people write and then how they're upvoting or downvoting other people that will allow us to draw that ideological space and allow us to find the kind of super consensual items. But we're not allowing people to actually directly reply on other people's proposals. That also kind of cuts out quite a lot of the trolling.
Great. There are other questions or comments for Carl? Yes.
That was best. Okay. Hello. I'm really interested in this bridge-based ranking model that you're discussing, and after briefly looking it up, I see that on Twitter, the community notes is also sort of an example of bridge-based rank. Okay, that's accurate. Okay. I'm wondering that why wouldn't a negative comment still garner support through the upvoting or downvoting? And how are you? There has to be a computer reading these comments, so there has to be certain terms that you're like categorizing as positive or negative. And I'm wondering, we've seen that people online very quickly figure this out. And for example, on TikTok, like you say, you unalived someone, not that you killed them, because if you write killed, like your post won't get shown. So there's quickly like workarounds that are kind of found. How does it deal with those issues?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yeah, fun fact about community notes. So what in fact actually happened there is, so the first platform to really use bridge-based ranking in a meaningful way in digital democracy is called Polis. And the inventor of Polis is someone I know quite well called Colin McGill, who's based in Seattle. When community notes, by the way, I think community notes is the best thing to literally ever come out of Twitter. It's like literally the only interesting feature that I think Twitter's ever shipped. When community notes was first being made, they actually went out kind of to the engineering team to meet Colin. And in the white paper that describes community notes, they use as inspiration Polis's platform. So it's very, very clever what community notes do. They essentially try and do what Polis can do statically. So rather than a static discussion, they basically are trying to draw the same kind of like ideological mapping live dynamically across the whole of Twitter all of the time. It really is an impressive and an exciting piece of engineering, community notes, and has great promise. The problem, though, of course, is that all of these things being shipped onto social media don't actually mean anything for politics in terms of formal political power. And so, like what we're trying to do with Waves is to try and take some of those kind of informational theoretic approaches, but then actually turn it into a proper political process. In terms of it might well be that a highly polarized comment does receive lots of votes, but it won't receive a lot of visibility. So if that comment is highly polarized, meaning that only one particular tribe heavily supports it, but the other tribes do not, then bridge-based ranking as a ranking will not rank that highly. So that message will be seen by fewer and fewer people as it becomes more and more clear that it's highly polarizing. And so it won't get that many votes at all, to be honest, because it will just be seen by fewer people and therefore not receive many votes. In terms of how we actually do the point of step number one, which is what we're talking about in Waves, is basically to create to identify hyper-consensual statements. So if people are asked, what does care matter to you? I mean, and the second deliberation we're doing in the new year, the question is, where should the houses go, basically? And we will get a series of answers back. And we'll probably take roughly 10 or 15, it will likely to be kind of statements which have come out of this process, which almost everyone in the process supports. And I know that can sound completely crazy, that you can have a political discussion like this and actually find super consensus. But that is what evidence is showing works with bridge-based ranking. If you look at what Polis did in Taiwan, that is exactly what they did time and time again. And so I am confident that at the end of this process, we will have super consensual statements coming out that almost everyone supports. That will be 85, 90, 95% support across the group. And that is not, we're not doing any semantic analysis on that. We're not doing sentiment analysis or anything like that. That will actually be people upvoting or downvoting those particular statements. Now, I run a whole tech lab. I mean, I'm the founder of something called the Center for the Analysis of Social Media, and I spent most of my working life doing natural language processing analytics on social media data. So we can definitely geek out about kind of how to do semantic analysis and the way in which people try and defeat platform moderation using semantic analysis. I mean, maybe that's not for this discussion, but Jennifer, bring me back and let's have a whole methodological deep dive on NLP.
We're going to geek out in the next panel, and I think also you'll be represented by Chris Beal, I think, on that one as well as we look at disarm as one of the approaches to be well represented anyway. Carl. So let's bring another model into play into this discussion about different practices. So I'm going to invite Juhi Sohani from Imagining and Otherwise to talk about another approach to community-rooted, values-aligned approach to storytelling and to space creation.
Hi, everyone. I'm actually hoping that for the next, I'm going to set a timer. Because I love to talk. I'm hoping that for the next 10 or so minutes, I know that a lot of people are coming here with their ED hat on or their director hat on, or they're a PhD candidate or a student or whatever. I am hoping that maybe what we can do for the next 10 minutes is remove all of those, be people for a second, and talk about how, and I love that the last panel really got into this and like set us up for this, how we can actually seed spaces for connection in real life and how that relates to information integrity. So it's going to be a little woo-woo for a second, but if you can close your eyes or put your hands over your eyes and just like feel your feet on the floor and think about how you show up in spaces. So that's your workplace, but that's also outside, how you go to the gym, how you go for a walk, how you show up at your community center, how you show up at the grocery store. Who are you? Just think about that. Are you an artist? Are you a thinker? Are you a video game person? Gamer? Okay. Think about that for a second and just take a really deep nose breath in and then out from the mouth. Okay. Here's the thing. You can open your eyes if you want. You can also not. I don't think I have a good podcast voice though, so it wouldn't be very fun to listen to. I'm wondering how many people here have with a raise of hands, have aunties or nosy church ladies or neighbors, thank you, elders in community organizing spaces that have said things where you're like, I love you, but no. Okay, I'm seeing some hands go up. You know, there are uncles there. There are people with whom we've been in community, with whom we don't fully agree. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. How has it felt, if you can just reflect on it, how has it felt to know that you disagree with somebody, but that you want to, like, you have this thing inside you where you're like, oh, I really want to explain this. Isn't there kind of this like this reaction that you have in your body where you get like a bit of a knot, maybe like in your chest, like in your sternum? I see some nods, and you're just like, like, I just don't have it in me right now to explain this. Well, that's a good thing. Don't explain it. We really need to stop explaining and start connecting. And that's how we're going to build healthier community spaces. If you grew up going to church and then maybe stopped going to church because you're like, I don't really resonate with that anymore. Maybe you still go. Maybe you go to a masjid, a temple, a gurdwara, and you are around a lot of people with whom you share values or you share culture, you share something, but maybe you don't share all your politics. These are the places in which we need to show up without our NGO or policy analyst or, academic hats on. And we need to re-enter these spaces. So I want to do a little brief reflection on authenticity. We've talked a lot about trust and showing up and being authentic. What does authenticity even mean anymore? Can just anyone, an example or what comes up for you when you think of authenticity, just the idea of it?
A real and unscripted moment.
A real and unscripted moment. That's great. Does anybody else have a thought on what authenticity is or looks like? Yeah.
It's letting your real self out.
Letting your real self out. When's the last time you showed up in a space, in a community space? I love that. And you had a real unscripted moment and you let your real self out, if you can just think about it. I feel for many people that has been rare. Awesome. Not awesome, but awesome to see some nods. This is why I'm hoping that we can kind of think about what authenticity looks like in the context of purpose, curiosity, and reflection. So showing up in these spaces in which we might share culture, identity, and some values, but not necessarily shared language, which is another important thing that we should talk about, and think, why am I here? A lot of the times we're actually sharing stories without realizing it. We're sharing food. There's a story in that. Somebody made that. People are sharing it. People are eating it. People are going to talk about it later. They're going to be like, that was really good food, or that food was really bad. My mom makes it better. But think about it. Why am I here? Right? So when you're in an interaction or when you're in community with people, always, as opposed to having a reaction, it does really help to kind of reset your nervous system, which I think Chandel was talking about briefly in the last panel, and think, why am I here? Then approaching things with curiosity. So why are they here? Why are the people around me even showing up in this world in which everyone is working like a job and a side hustle? Everyone has like many hats or whatever. Everyone is trying to make ends meet. Groceries cost way too fucking much, right? Why are people showing up in a space in real life? And then reflection. The practice of ongoing reflection is actually, if we think about it, a form of monitoring. It's a form of evaluation. We just don't necessarily think about it in the context of the individual and then the small group, but that's what reflection is all about. Why will I return? Sometimes, and this is me speaking from the I, but also a little bit from the we, I know that there are a lot of organizers out there who are like, oh, I have an organizing meeting that I have to go to and it's going to be on Zoom and I'm really tired. So I'm not really going to show up to this community event. There are folks, some of my friends in Alberta said that they didn't want to go to Stampede because it's a lot. It's really commercial. Gen Pop is there and I'm tired, right? But what I really loved about what somebody said in one of yesterday's panels was, the fascists are on Twitter, so we should also be there. And the people who are interacting with them, they're also at Stampede. They're also at art-based events. They're also at community events and festivals and the kinds of things that, we're all exhausted and don't have time to go to, or are like, we're working late, so we're not going to go. We should be showing up there, and that's part of the work. And we're showing up there as individuals, so we can actually make deep connections. And so how do we stop explaining and start connecting? Who here has said something in a space and then been like, oh my God, that could actually have been a little bit problematic? Yeah. Thank you for being honest. And that's the thing. All of our politics have evolved over time. So why not create those bridge spaces by allowing for a little bit of problematic? Because without communicating and connecting and approaching those things with curiosity, we're never going to bridge to where we want people to be. We talk a lot about being like, let's meet folks where they're at, but we meet them where they're at and then we're like, come and be here now. And really, there is an entire journey. I will tell you that probably 13 years ago, I wanted to get married, settle down, have a husband. I looked down on women that wanted to have a job. And that was a journey for me. I grew up in a conservative Muslim household, and that culturally was really rewarded for me. And here I am today, divorced with a job. So here we are. But there was a journey. There was a journey, and I had in between politics, right? And we all have those. So how do we create spaces for those? How do we address fear with curiosity? Fear happens in your amygdala. It activates your fight or flight. We talked a lot in Amber's presentation about the role of fear in climate communication. And there is a very real role of biological fear that does keep us surviving, which is important. However, we're not always building lasting neural connections when we're making decisions from a place of fear or when we're thinking from a place of fear. In order to make lasting neural connections, we need to activate some behavioral flexibility in our brains. And curiosity activates the posterior cingulate cortex in your brain. And there, you're not activated from your fight or flight. Now you're thinking a little bit from curiosity. You're thinking, what could happen in the future? And so I'm wondering for folks here who are, as we talk about this, thinking about the community spaces that they may have access to but haven't tapped into in a while. If you haven't been to a faith-based gathering place like a church or a masjid or something, if you haven't been to a community center in a while, if you haven't been to your library, there are so many things happening at libraries that people are not accessing anymore. If you haven't been to any of those things, I actually would very much encourage folks here to think about that and to just take the leap and show up as an individual and just remind yourself what's happening in community. And then a lot of the ways in which we operate actually start to shift. If we have power in different, with our different hats, it's really important for us to remain connected to what's actually happening and not just theorize about it. And that's going to mean a lot of weird conversations. But that also means that we're building those unusual coalitions. And those are the ones that are going to be built to last. So one of my final points that I would love to talk about is, like I'm saying, this extra institutional power. So unfortunately, I know we're talking no hats, but one of the other hats I wear, from which I've gotten to meet a lot of you folks and work with you, is as the managing director at Action Collab, where we actually we create these online spaces for people to gather that are values-based, that are based on kind of like a shared cultural identity that's outside of maybe what we get to talk about with our NGO hats on. And those spaces, because they get to be a little bit less sanitized and a little bit more direct, we get to have some of those conversations. And a lot of the conversations, if you dig deep with curiosity, the people that are commenting and talking to each other, they actually very much share values with us. They want polluters to pay. They want big corporations out of our government. However, they're just using different language. And so how do we allow a little bit of problematic? And how do we meet people where they're at? And then how do we walk that bridge together? And that builds trust. So what I would love to close off on is, in order to build trust, I think that I would love for us all to show up in those community spaces, to just be for a second. And for me, I want to imagine the future, imagine the otherwise, but I want to imagine the future, and it already does exist. And what I want to build a world in which I can argue with people and I can debate with people, and then we can walk away and share a meal together, because it doesn't define the relationship, and those relationships sustain, and we learn and we grow together. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, especially emphasizing that need for trust and authenticity. In one of my other hats, I actually teach about leadership, and one of the models there, it's Patrick Lencioni talks about this, that without trust, you can't have the divisive conversations that you need to develop a consensus, to make sure that people are held accountable and to generate results. So that's one of the many things that kind of triggered for me in your talk there. I'm just opening it up for comments or questions, or from other rooms. Yes, please. Can I get a microphone?
Thanks. Sorry. Is the ceiling like, anyway?
The ceiling microphones are supposed to work, but it's I think the microphone's better. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciated that presentation. Thank you. I mean, all the presentations, but my question is mainly for Juhi. I really appreciated everything you said, and I think it's so important. And I think just thinking about some of the spaces on the left where I spend a lot of my time, I feel like we have in some ways done a lot of damage with the way that we talk about, calling people out and, all the things that we know, right? But at the same time, as someone with like a fair amount of privilege and therefore, some obligation to show up to the people in the circles that I move in and push forward certain conversations. I wonder if you could just talk a bit more about kind of how we show up with the responsibility that sometimes we might need to bring to those conversations, or a kind of goal, or like, how do we be strategic and also authentic at the same time in those spaces, and kind of, anyway, I hope that makes sense. Like, it's a really important conversation. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate that. Actually, that is something that, we were briefly talking about yesterday. And I've had this conversation with folks every now and then about just like, what does it mean to show up, even with your friends? Maybe it's a comradeship, maybe it's some sort of relationship that you have where you share an objective, but you're having a hard time getting aligned on the way to get there. And one of the things, honestly, that I find that works best is, again, asking a lot of questions, right? But also coming in and being extremely vulnerable about the fact that if we have a shared goal, then what are we even trying to do here? Right. And so one of the things that tends to work is identifying the shared value, connecting it to the motivation. So in climate, the motivation is we want a livable planet for all of us. The shared value in that can really vary. And if you find that there has been a lot of policing of language in the spaces in which you've been operating, then I actually think that the value there is authenticity, and to be able to identify that and name that as a re-emerging system of oppression. Because the more we police language, and this is something that I had a conversation with some folks about yesterday, but the more we police language, the more we uphold those same carceral systems or punitive systems that are keeping us apart. And so naming the fact that, in a conversation, like, hey, I feel like we're talking about this, but really at the end of the day, what we want to achieve is this work plan, right? So what if we just go back and work back from there, and then we decide on what language we're going to use later? Because there is absolutely a very important role of language and the evolution of language to be able to perceive things differently. But this is an example that we were talking about the other day, is every time I have worked with unhoused folks, if I have used the term unhoused, they're like, what are you saying? I'm homeless. And so there is a reason that we analyze that differently, that there is, that no one should not have a home, but that there is a lack of housing. However, functionally, that doesn't work for us. And so the way that we are able to get there is to be like, well, what do we want, right? We want like a housing framework. Let's talk about that and let's move backward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great. So let's bring in Mitchell Beer into the conversation from the Energy Mix to also talk about opinion leader journalism as another model.
Thanks, Jennifer. Opinion leaders. Sure. Thank you. The story behind the shirt is that I got this before the pandemic. I should go here. I got this before the pandemic, and I thought it was a climate change T-shirt, and it still is. Who knew that the dirty looks I get for it now, or because there's also a vaccine T-shirt. And let's all celebrate, by the way, that there are public health people in the room, and there were yesterday. They're the heroes among us, and let's all just be clear about that. So it's a good thing that I never prepared slides for this talk, because after yesterday's mind-blowing, spectacular session, went home and completely rewrote my presentation, which is why it's coming from a laptop, which is why it might be a little bit raggedy. So apologies in advance. But it starts with thanks to Jennifer and Nico and everyone else at the Information Integrity Lab for bringing us all together for this extraordinary event. Starting with some quick background on Energy Mix Productions. It is opinion leader journalism and more, I hope, we intend. We are a nonprofit community news website and e-digest on climate change, energy, and the shift off carbon. We've been in pretty much continuous production for 11 and a half years. We don't get out much, but what we have been able to do is compile an indexed archive of more than 30,000 stories on all aspects of climate science, impacts, solutions, how the shift off carbon can play out and get done in time to try to leave no one else behind. And increasingly on what we see as the really imminent beginning of the collapse of the fossil fuel economy out of fossil fuel companies. And I'm just going to throw that out there without elaborating for our talk today. And this is the drawback from working from a laptop. We set out to earn our readers and earn decision makers' trust every single day as a source of reliable, independent news reporting from a base of deep expertise in climate change and energy. We're testing new models of opinion leader journalism to support audiences that can have a disproportionate impact in driving faster, deeper carbon cuts that leave no one else behind. And the information you need for people who work in the municipal space, for example, will be overlapping but different from what people need in the grid sector, or more to the point, people who are trying to influence the grid sector. And I could go on about those differences forever. Along with the Basic Income Canada Network, we're a convening partner for the Green Resilience Project, which operates at the intersection between income insecurity, local resilience, and climate solutions. And in the a little over 4 years that we've been working in the field, we've worked with nearly 1,500 participants alongside 49 community partners from coast to coast to coast. And by the way, I'm laying this out not because it's about us, but in the hope that there might be some germ of a model in anything that I'm saying that others can adapt and improve so that we can all figure out how to get this done and how to scale it. My favorite part of the story about green resilience, and this is a credit to the incredible team that's put it together, 61% of those community partners start their work and usually work outside the climate and energy space. So they're already outside the bubble, and we've been so lucky and honored to be able to connect with them. Along the way, we're learning how a news organization and a community development and listening project can live under the same organizational roof, and how we can reinforce each other's work. For Energy Mix, and really for all of us in this room, so much of this goes back to the fundamental role of journalism, and we heard some amazing material on that yesterday, but I'll go over a little bit more. Dinosaur alert. I come from the generation that was inspired by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who were two reporters for the Washington Post, who did the work to uncover the Watergate scandal in the 1970s that brought down a United States president back in the day when there was anything about a president that the United States could be shocked about. I'll just put that out there. And of course, that maps right back to misinformation and disinformation. They got that done by doing the work and by getting the goods, not by spewing out unproven opinions or theories and calling them news. Reliable news is one of our most important tools to produce a common base of knowledge that we can trust and have confidence in. And that's a starting point for the legitimate arguments and the hard conversations and the community convenings in which we can have the conversations we need to have. And that makes journalism, reliable journalism, a resource that others can use for advocacy and persuasion, as long as it comes from a trusted source. And I say that because we're often tagged as advocacy and we're not. We gather the information through a process that I'll elaborate on a little bit. You can imagine that I was on the edge of my seat yesterday during the media panel, hearing the talk about bias and about the really thin line between news reporting and advocacy. Almost 2 years ago, exactly when it was still safe to cross the US border, I was at Columbia University for a conference called Climate Change is Everything. It was co-hosted by the Covering Climate Now Global News Collaborative, of which we're an active member. And so many stories to tell from that, but one was a breakout session where reporters in the room had, what I should mention, by the way, sorry, is that there were more than 200 of us there who all said that we were reporting full-time on climate change. And that was the most amazing moment. That would not have happened 5 years ago. It would not have happened 10 years ago. And we were all there in Pulitzer Hall talking about climate journalism. In one of the breakout sessions, it was so clear that the people around the room were committed to the model of solutions journalism that you heard about yesterday from Nicole and Chloe Ann and Cameron, and so deeply cautious about crossing the line into advocacy, knowing that to do that would violate our professional ethics, would undercut our own credibility permanently, would do the same to our news outlets. And so I wanted to talk just briefly about how we balance that at the energy mix, because our mission, again, not about us, but just about models we might be able to build on. We start out from a deeply egregious bias that disqualifies us as journalists to anybody I learned journalism from in the 1970s, dinosaur alert, and anybody you would probably learn from it now. And that egregious bias is that climate change is the crisis of our lifetimes, and if we don't solve that, we can't solve anything else. In conventional journalism terms, once you've said that, you've gone over the wall and you're biased. That bias shapes our story lineup. We scan through about 1,200 incoming news headlines per week to figure out the 24 or so stories that we have the capacity to write that our readers have time to scroll through. Once we've assigned ourselves out to those stories, that's where the process is standard journalism right down the line. We do the research, we do the homework, we collect the interviews, we get as deeply into it, as Chloe Ann was saying yesterday, as deeply into it as resources and time permit. We follow the evidence where it leads, and then we tell the story without fear or favor. And I'm saying we in the sort of our own organization, but that's we about anybody who practices journalism. And it distinguishes from the kind of I love Naomi Klein's language of doppelganger investigative journalists. It distinguishes us from the doppelgangers at outfits like Rebel Media and the other doppelgangers in the conspiracy community who will just get out there and start harassing people, gather the facts that fit their wild ideas, and claim that they're investigative journalists. But now there's more. Media have also been known for a long time as the fourth estate for our essential role in an informed democratic society. And at about 9:10 p.m. Eastern on June 27th, 2024, when we all saw a US president who had championed climate solutions melt down against a predatory sociopath, I think many of us knew in that moment that journalism would have to step up to its role as a bulwark for democracy as never before in our lifetimes. And since so much of that misinformation and disinformation plays out in our climate space, and thanks a million times to Catherine Abreu for articulating those connections so clearly yesterday. Since so much of it happens in our space, it's specifically climate journalism that needs to step up as a bulwark for democracy, and now, with our elbows up, a bulwark protecting Canadian sovereignty. And if you had told me 11 and a half years ago that we'd be making that kind of highfalutin claim for our little tiny under-resourced news organization, first of all, I wouldn't have known what to do with the idea that we would be a full-fledged news organization, but I wouldn't have known what to do with that idea. And so moving on just briefly, I'm going to ask for a time check because unlike others, I didn't set a timer.
Time to, because we have one more to go.
Yeah, I know, that's why I'm asking. Okay, so start to wind down a bit. Quickly, I haven't spoken much about the Green Resilience Project, and the work there is really about reaching outside the climate bubble and listening, not lecturing, until we find common ground. For that 61% of our community partners who are outside the climate space, we're not here to try to pull them in. We show up with climate and energy expertise. We learn what their most important priorities are. And then our next question is, how can we help? What do we have in a climate and energy toolbox that will help them serve the priorities that they woke up with this morning and get it done faster and better? So maybe I should close with just a couple of my favorite climate messages these days that flip the script from our agenda to theirs. The best argument that I've heard for a community microgrid with solar plus storage is just put yourself in New Orleans for a moment, because this is where this one originates. We know that when, not if, the next Category 5 hurricane lands, the power is going to go out. When, not if that happens, you'll know before we do how much power is left in the battery that drives the medical device that keeps you or your loved one alive. You'll know, we won't, how long it will take after your fridge loses power that your insulin will spoil. If you can get down the street or across the neighborhood to our community lighthouse, which has been retrofitted to use less energy and has a solar plus storage microgrid to survive the hurricane, you'll survive the hurricane too. That's a climate message, because it's a technology that also reduces emissions. For a business, you say you want a data center to power the incredibly cool and incredibly necessary platforms like, I don't know, climatedata.ca that we heard about yesterday. When site selection goes on for a data center, the first question they ask is energy, and they don't care what kind of energy, they just want to know that it'll be there. If they don't get the right answer, they probably won't ask any more questions. They'll go on to the next community. They're looking for energy that is cheaper, faster to deploy, more reliable in a grid emergency, that is more likely with global weirding, if you heard Catherine Hayhoe yesterday. And all of those answers, almost all the time, almost everywhere. The answers to all of those questions bring us back to some form of renewables, energy efficiency, and a few other nerdy details behind that. So in both of those messages, the closest I got to saying climate change or crisis, well, crisis around the hurricane, the closest I got to saying climate change was global weirding. And really important, especially speaking after Amber, none of this line of thought replaces the other strategies that we know we need to build on and scale. This cannot be an approach that buries climate, and we do need the choir. But if the choir, if those of us who are here, if the people inside our various bubbles, if we were all enough to win, and if we were getting through well enough, we'd be closer to winning. And our hope, our belief, our experience around both sides of our organization is that these kinds of synergy are another tool in the toolbox that will maybe help get us where we need to go a little bit faster. I think I'd better stop now.
Thank you very much, Mitchell, not only for bringing forward models, but also the passion of your perspectives. Are there questions or comments for Mitchell? Yes, please.
Thanks. So you went back to the topic of like advocacy or neutrality that was raised yesterday in the journalism panel. And I've always felt it's kind of a trap, right? Because all media is biased. The narratives that are being amplified or disamplified, the stories that are chosen, and that's why there's like reemergence of like alternative media that give voices to people who are not necessarily represented in the media. So climate change, like in some media, the very fact of talking about climate change is considered as being crossing the line to advocacy. Just the very fact of so I thought yesterday we went like very quickly, like the panelist, how do you say, the animator, the moderator just said, oh yeah, you're referring to advocacy journalism. Not necessarily, because there's kind of like there's just recognition of this is where my media exists and this is what I'm writing about. So I think we have to be very careful in this, because otherwise it's kind of, we will censor stories just because we don't want to be perceived as being advocates.
And I can take you back to arguments in journalism school in the 1970s, literally, with those same concerns about what really is advocacy. Why are we really here? Not in the existential sense at that point. That was later in the evening, but just what are we doing if we're constraining ourselves this way? And I thought it was so really interesting when Chris made the point yesterday that finally, we're at the point where most news outlets no longer feel that they have an obligation to quote unquote balance a climate scientist's research and knowledge with some climate deniers' argument.
Yeah, but I just want to say that the way that they report energy narratives and the energy sector narratives in Canada is fully biased. But
totally.
They're like, the fish that's in water that doesn't realize that it's in water.
They don't see the water. Chris was making the point yesterday that there's no perceived need to balance the story about how great the tar sands industry is, or carbon capture and storage, with the reality of what's going on behind it. When we heard yesterday about going to multiple sources, honestly, I felt really reassured from some of what I heard on the panel that, yeah, it's not so much both sides as multiple dimensions. You have to dig a little bit deeper on a project, a story like carbon capture, for example, to get not just your own sense, but reliable data and evidence that no, it won't be ready till 2035, if then. So don't be claiming you can do this now. That's elaborating on a story without just falling into this unacknowledged bias. Yeah.
Another question.
So 2 super quick questions. One, cool to hear about the 61% outside of the climate space. Can you talk a little bit about, what spaces are within that 61% when you were referring to that? And the second piece was also loved the focus on the bridge building, the listening, and was wondering, appreciated the example of the messaging. Can you speak to an example of you actually engaging in that listening, in that bridge building that was maybe particularly challenging for you?
I can answer most of that directly. The 61%, just as examples, groups that are working on housing as a right, on housing access, anti-poverty groups, Indigenous communities and groups, groups working on equity and racism issues. And every time I'm asked the question, food security groups, every time I'm asked the question, I come up with different mix of answers, because we cross over, the Green Resilience Project crosses over so many different sectors. And really it's, the intent is to connect with groups that are already active in their communities, so that the discussion we help them seed will support that continuing work. How to build the discussion, we find, is it begins with going in with open-ended questions. When we started the first round of virtual sessions and they were all virtual during the pandemic, I mean, the first question was almost as basic as, "Are you okay? How are you doing?" Right? When we're all in that point, and really starting with what's going on the ground, what's going on in your life, in your community, and then not, okay, so let's connect this to climate change now. Do you see any instances, where climate and energy intersects with this, where you're experiencing impacts of climate change? It will sort of go through those, but it's almost as important as people having the option of saying, no, I don't see it. And once that more open-ended conversation begins, we found almost universally, and it's supported by a lot of the research we've been hearing about here, people are saying, yeah, sure, we see it. Absolutely. And then it's a facilitated conversation that goes where they want it to go And increasingly now we're building in an element. There were some reasons this didn't happen earlier on in the project, but now we're very deliberately building in at least the opportunity for people to decide, well, what can we do about this together? And that's not something that can be forced by a facilitator supported from away. It has to come from within the group. People have to be ready to walk through that door. But we think we're learning more and more how to open it so that they can decide.
Yeah, thanks, Mitchell. I just an observation that yesterday's conversation about about media made me reflect. I'm a journalist, former journalist who worked at the Montreal Gazette with Campbell Clark 30 years ago, and we are in a more fractured media landscape now. It's a time, however, of potential, and I've watched your news publication blossom alongside a range of new news media outlets, which aren't so new now. Like I live in British Columbia, the Tyee, the National Observer, and the Narwhal are three newish or newer media outlets that have blossomed since the demise of legacy media, and these are challenging all the contemporary the legacy media outlets to be better at what they do. And there are many different forms of media will arise in the period of technological change we're going into, but it's a time of potential as well as a time of threat. So, I mean, there's lots more to that, but I really appreciate what you've done in your advocacy journalism and,
advocacy. Not advocacy.
No, but sorry, I beg your pardon. I mean, in your biased journalism, in the best sense of the word.
The way we.
Yeah. And I used to write for Adbusters. That was my gig. So.
Oh yeah. Where's Adbusters now that we need them most?
We do have one more model to come. Can we come back to your question after one last presentation, or was it on point with Mitchell's?
It was related to J. Rosen and media and the Church of the Savvy.
Sorry, I can't hear. Yep, sorry, we'll get a mic to you. Yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate it. It's related to J. Rosen, the media critic at New York University, and the Church of the Savvy and ideological perspectives in journalism. So I don't know if I'm happy to wait, and ask the question after, if that's okay, or.
Proceed now. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Naomi Devine. I'm a political campaigner and I teach persuasive and strategic communications as two of the things that I do. And as a campaigner and dealing with media, and I help people with integrity, I like to say, get elected kind of thing too. And so when I've got candidates that are pro climate change, for example, and I'd like to see them in seats of power, the difficulty I find in the media is that, yes, there are, of course, journalists who cover climate or so-called advocacy journalists. But the problem is actually most of the journalists find us to be idealists. And this is where J. Rosen basically said, instead of dividing American journalists along ideological lines, left or right, is that they actually worship at the Church of the Savvy. And what this means is I'll boil it down, they want to be seen as cool, right? And cool to them is proximity to power. And the antithesis to that is that if you believe in climate change or write about these things, you're an idealist, therefore not cool, kind of thing. And so I just wondered, have you ever thought about taking out a hit on your colleagues? Do you know what I mean? In terms of journalistically calling them out on this. Do you know what I mean at times? Because I heard yesterday that comment about when Katherine Hayhoe was asked if she was a Democrat, right? And you can't be seen as an advocate. Okay, so advocate now equals Democrat for some reason. That imbalance gets us into trouble because we try to deal with that, right? And instead of actually calling out and saying, why would that be a problem, right? How are Republicans not advocates, for example? And the conversation.
I'm sorry, we need to.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry for time
to get through. So
yeah. So anyway, I just wondered.
Any quick reflections, Mitchell, before?
Yeah, so I'm happy to just leave that as a statement and not.
Great, thank you.
Okay, all right, great. So we've been talking about different approaches to bridges, to journalism, but the way in which we communicate can also have a big impact. And those who are of my generation remember Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the massage, the medium is the message. And so that's in part what we're going to explore in our last model with Jonathan Chodjaï, the Directeur Général de CScience at Le Lab. Yep.
Thank you very much. Well, I feel very lucky to be part of this very special event. If it's a David versus Goliath situation, well, I'm very, very happy to be in Team David with all of you. Thank you very much to InfoLab for welcoming us and to make those reflections, essential reflections, part of this event. And of course, media is a very specific subject. It's a matter because it's always been a kind of a media with society. People have the need to get information and to gather those. So of course, lots of different ways of communicating has been around for a long time. Leconnecteur.ca, which is the media I'm an editor of, is based in Montreal, and we try to have a different approach because we tried the regular one and it wasn't fit anymore for our needs. The fact is that for many years we were like following actuality and trying to have like a good point of view about what's being said and the good way to share it. And we didn't have nor the time nor the resources to do it well. And of course, it's a real problem right now to be able to do the job in the right way if you want to do it seriously. We needed, of course, something very specific, and we tried to like take back the control of the narrative. So that's why we did it this way. It's a multimedia magazine, and it's not a conventional media in sorts, because yet we got journalists, yet we got columnists and experts, lots of them, because we speak about technology and its impact on society. And right now, I don't know for you, but in my household, in my company, technology is pretty much everywhere. So it's a very big issue to be able to understand it better. And the nonprofit I work with aim to bettering the understanding for people about technology and what it's being done in our life. So at first we were kind of a regular media, but as we were changing it for this kind of magazine, the idea was to be able to select the kind of subject we were going to work. And we went with a calendar and we said, like, those are the 20 issues we want to address this year. And then we shared this information to lots of experts saying, well, if you want to collaborate, do it. And we will let you the opportunity to give your point of view. So each 2 weeks we go with a magazine with lots of different point of views, and it helps, I think, giving to people all the information they need to make their own decisions. And policy actually is not necessarily taken with the good appreciation of science, of data. And for me, well, decisions that are not based on data, something is missing. More specifically, when we go with this kind of approach, we wanted to be near the needs of the users. So we went with a very specific approach. I don't know if you know Harry Potter, but when they open the journal, there's lots of things moving, there's lots of things living. And we wanted this to be part of our model. So our magazine, which is online, of course, is very animated, and we tried to put it like a real multimedia experience. So we got audio, we got video, we got lots of text, of course, and this is for accommodating, I would say, every kind of users, because right now people reading a magazine are not necessarily all with the same tools. They use their phone mostly, so it's not about having the long text, it's about having the right experience and the information you needed. And that's the reason why we work so deeply in connection with our partners that allows us to come with our cameras, with our obligation to give a right sense of what's going on. And it's a very interesting model because it's not about selling advertising, it's more about creating content together. So that's what we want, and that's what I'm so proud to be a part of right now. Actually, I was talking about advertising, but of course, money is an issue. Money right now, without money, there's no project. So in the end, we all are struggling with this kind of problematic. And we have to understand that the big GAFAM and such are not really, I don't know, fond of integrity. They are fond of followers, they are fond of data. So we have to make a little perspective point, change the point of view. And this is something we do thanks to a right number of people thinking and believing that change is possible, that change is ongoing right now, and that we can go further with different ways of communicating. I'm thinking about video because it's a good way to go with youngsters and to people who don't have the time or the needs addressed in a good way with long articles. So I think that everybody tries to do this way, the good way, and being part of a community is also to share your experience, what you know for sure, and what we want to be part of the reflection, the general reflection as a project of society. So, for what it's worth, well, Les Connecteurs is a free model. You can go and see the magazine online and all what we do, and we really want to be part of something greater. So all of you that are doing things well on your specific field, feel free to be part of it and to collectively better what people are knowing and what they want to understand better. For what it's worth too, I would say that in the end, even if it's not a traditional way of making a magazine or a media, it seems to me like it's a new way of doing it. And there's a change ongoing, and this change forces us to address issues in a different way. So in this field too, you have been, all of you, confronted with this idea, well, taking into account your website, trying to be on social media and doing what you have to do to have people attention. Well, you're not alone. So all together we can do, well, showing up at community with all that we have or we got, with integrity, because it's so important, essential, man. And in the end, for what's about climate, well, you know, science is not something you believe in. Science is what it is. We have to deal with it, and we have to go further. So I hope that together we are going to do something great. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Jonathan, and also for weaving into your final comments there some of the issues that other speakers have also brought forward and as have come forward in our dialogue as well. Are there any final questions for this session or for Jonathan in particular? Oh, okay. And then there's another question there. Yep.
My question to you is, I think that Les Connecteurs is such an interesting concept. And I think it is like we're seeing kind of innovation, right? In a media context. I'm wondering who your audience currently is, and then who your target audience is. And just like, what does that look like in how you are shaping your material?
Well, thank you. Well, we got a B2B2C approach. The idea is to aim at innovators, deciders, and people able to make a change. But in the end, obviously, technology address all kind of needs in society. So education, of course, but not only. Well, everybody linked to technology in his current situation and what he wants to be the next one has to go this way. So we try to make both of them actually, and we address the issue with expertise, but then in a second hand we want people to know that they are part of the conversation and they are not left out, with people knowing and them.
In the last comment.
Thank you. I guess this is a bit more open-ended. I'm just wondering what success might look like from your perspective and your platform in maybe 5-10 years. That doesn't necessarily feed into just having a bigger piece of the pie of the attention economy, whether that looks like certain types of engagements with your readers or having certain topics that you're able to cover with more legitimacy or having certain partnerships. Yeah, are there any of those elements that are on the mind?
Thank you. That's an amazing question, actually. The fact is that we are a nonprofit and we have a mission that's about helping people understand better what's at stake. But the media wasn't really eager to give us what we needed. So we had to create one. So it's the need that decided how we were doing this. And the way we see it is that each time a new organization works with us, we share a little more of the attention of everybody, but in a good sense. No, we don't want to take their attention out. We want them to be conscious. And conscience is about the success rate for me. Maybe one of our magazine is going to reach like 3, 4, 5,000 people. Sometimes it's 100,000. We don't decide it, and we can't do much because of the GAFAM rules that decide sometimes that climate change is a political issue, so you don't have an opportunity to talk about it. It's just cut up. But everybody that take the information into his hands and do something with it, that's success for us. Thank you.
Great. And Nico, did you have a comment before we wrap up the panel?
I did, just about sort of what's coming up. Just want to remind everybody that at 12:50, so during the lunch break, we have Sam Bardman with us. Sam is a United Nations artist in residence who is going to do a presentation, a really unique presentation on science art collaborations and how both those things can intersect in some really thought-provoking ways. So just a reminder to everyone to make sure to check that out. It's on the right side of the floor as you exit this room. And on the other side of the floor is a hologram installation and a cylinder installation as well for you to check out. So with that, I'll say bon appetit and bon appetit.
Great discussion and bon appetit.